and welcome to the panel, Solutions for a Sustainable Future, Circular Economy. My name is Kübra Koldemir. First of all, I would like to introduce our speakers to you. Our first speaker is Alice Calro. She's Corporate Sustainability Senior Manager at Gudera. Alice, could you please tell a little bit about yourself?
Hi, Kübra. Nice to meet everyone. Welcome to all the audience with us. Yes, so I have worked during most of my career as a business generalist. I have been running transformation programs, cross-functional organization-wide programs, and building stakeholder-centric strategies and then translating them to execution. Since 2019, I have transitioned into corporate sustainability. I have acquired various qualifications in high maturity sustainability practices from the likes of Harvard and Stanford and Oxford and the GRI and so on and so forth. And now I combine this, I use this combination of having the business acumen and understanding the high maturity corporate sustainability practices to really help companies integrate sustainability into their core business, into the core strategy, and to disseminate it across functions. I also specialize particularly in helping making these practices accessible to small and medium-sized enterprises for whom it is often much more difficult. Yes.
Thank you, Alice. So our second speaker is Rajesh Chabara, and he is Managing Director at CSR Works International. Rajesh, could you please go ahead?
Thank you, Kübra. Thanks for inviting me to this very, very interesting panel discussion on circularity. I'm here in Singapore. So CSR Works International is the earliest, the oldest sustainability services firm in Singapore. And we have three pillars of activities: consulting, training, and thought leadership. And through these three programs or three business pillars, we have built a very international network of friends and that we work with, and through our consulting to training and through our thought leadership programs. I want to also mention it here that our thought leadership programs are very important to us because since we were the first sustainability services firm in Singapore, we thought that we have to take it upon us to champion and to advocate for sustainability because there was no one else. We were the only one at that time. That was 16 years ago. So then we went on to build some of the projects that we are really proud of. So one is Asia Sustainability Reporting Awards, for example. We wanted to bring and recognize those companies which were adopting sustainability reporting on voluntary basis. So now Asia Sustainability Reporting Awards are like the Oscars for reporting in Asia. And then likewise, we wanted to create the first conference dedicated to reporting, which is Asia Sustainability Reporting Summit. This year will be the 6th year. Kübra has attended that summit, and that's where I met her for the first time, I think. So I'm very, very pleased to be here, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Rajesh. And that is very true. It was actually one of the best ever experiences I had with any conference because it was very spontaneous. Everybody was stepping in, including people from the audience and the speakers at the panels. It was really, congratulations on that. I hope I can be there again in the future.
Yeah, this year, if you allow me to add one more thing, Kübra, because the third project that we have, which is very close to my heart, is Asia's Top Sustainability Superwomen, because we decided to start that project when I realized in my 20 years of sustainability career that there are so many women out there, and they are the ones who are actually driving sustainability, whether it's within the corporate sector or private sector or within NGOs. And I see here 3 of you today here, they are women. So I think that's what I noticed, and we have that program as well.
You're playing well to your audience.
That is wonderful. Thank you, Rajesh. Yes, definitely that is another program that is very much worth promoting and talking about. So I will move now to our third speaker. She's Andrea Webster. She's Finance System Transformation Lead at World Benchmarking Alliance. Andrea, could you please tell a bit more about that?
Okay, thank you. And just also I'd like to say what an honor it is to be here with such experienced and qualified co-panelists. So thank you for inviting me. I work with the World Benchmarking Alliance. Hopefully you're aware of that. We're a global NGO recognizing the role of the private sector in financing and funding the Sustainable Development Goals. I look after the finance system transformation lead, as you mentioned, and my objective is to move sustainable finance into the mainstream. What we're doing at the moment is scoring 400 of the global financial institutions that we feel are influential in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, scoring them across numerous indicators, aligning with the regulatory environment, basically to create a race to the top, to show them how they're doing, to help identify where we need to prioritize more. As a business tool, I hope, also as a tool for policymakers and regulators. We are very well aligned with regulators and contribute to a number of steering committees. And also obviously the greater finance ecosystem, because it's so interwoven, there's a role to play for everybody within that. Prior to joining the World Benchmarking Alliance, I come from the finance sector, so I'm looking forward to contributing that experience. I was in the asset management industry for 15 years, building asset management businesses across Asia and Europe, dealing with a wide range of different investors from institutions, banks, insurance companies, family offices, and obviously and then advisors that service the retail sector. And then prior to that, I spent 10 years in the life assurance industry, product and platform market. So quite wide experience, and I hope that makes for a good debate today.
Thank you very much. That is definitely a vast experience, Andrea. Thank you. So again, my name is Kübra, and I am founding partner at a think tank called Sustain Finance, and I'm also sustainability researcher at Argudan Governance Academy. Now let's go ahead with our panel, and let me first introduce quickly our subject to our audience, please. So a circular economy underpins sustainable long-term growth, and it makes good business sense. Second life is given to products or to their components through either recycling or through reusing. Their life cycle is extended. They create secondary markets, and the waste becomes a raw material, spurring new businesses that support this process. This concept imitates actual nature in a sense, where everything has a purpose and value. Everything is used, and where waste becomes a new resource. Even though our societies have been advancing in this area, in fact, a swifter and maybe more radical change is currently necessary, so we can secure a livable future and a planet capable of sustainable business. We should do more than achieve only incremental improvements on the status quo. Implementing a circular economy requires actually a business model transformation and a complete board and management buy-in. There is no way to implement circularity while being stuck in doing sustainability simply on the side. The most significant barrier to a circular transition is probably a mindset change, both for business leaders and for investors. Now, Alice, I would like to first start with you. Given that implementing circularity requires business model transformation, could you please explain to us how this can be achieved by corporations and by investors? And as opposed to incremental improvements to the existing condition, what methods can corporations deploy to make a radical change?
Thank you, Kübra, and thank you for the introduction. Before I jump into the methods, I would just like to ramp up the sense of urgency a little bit. We've had 3 IPCC reports come out between last year and this year, and I think we can say we have a global scientific consensus that we really need to quickly transition to thriving within planetary boundaries. We need a rapid systems change, and we also need to make radical steps towards this change now. starting point actually is that out of the 8 planetary boundaries that have been quantified, we've already breached 6 of them, and 1 of them is about to be breached. Yeah, so you can see that this is a pretty Herculean task ahead of us, and that's therefore obvious that we can't achieve this by nudging our business as usual, right? Now, you've correctly mentioned circularity as an approach is really an approach to achieving the system's change, right? It is an approach to preventing waste in the first place and to making sure that products and materials are circulated at their highest value. And what this means, everybody's, I think, aware of the 9 R's, right? The framework from rethinking, reusing, repairing, refurbishing, remanufacturing, and so on and so forth. A lot of these are things we've never been doing or we are not doing at all on the scale where we need to be doing them. And so that really brings me back to the fundamental change needed to value propositions, to business model, to our production, distribution, and consumption patterns, and so on and so forth. Coming back to your point, Kubra, we can't achieve this if we are doing sustainability to manage perceptions, if we are doing sustainability on the side. Now, coming to some methods, actually the answer is much simpler than it may look. Yeah. In order for a company to bring sustainability into the core business, into the core business strategy, you really just need to revisit all the preliminary exercises that go into your strategy design, your business strategy design, with a sustainability lens this time. So you have to rethink the stakeholder definition, who are the stakeholders you're including, and shift towards value chain stakeholders, planet-centric stakeholders, and so on and so forth. You have to redo your scenario analysis so as to include, future climate scenarios and so on and so forth, and identify the corresponding future risks and opportunities. And then you incorporate all of these findings into your business strategy, in any kind of guiding principles, key success metrics, you propagate it into your value proposition, your business and operating models, and so on and so forth. You will need to definitely revise incentive schemes accordingly. And then the last part is one of my, again, specialties, linking strategy to execution through the correct systems, programs, building capabilities, introducing processes, metrics, and review mechanisms. So it's really no rocket science, but there's a couple of caveats. One of them is, who actually owns sustainability in a company? And I don't want to go too much into it, but you can see the list of the laundry list I have just listed out. It really requires a lot of business acumen, and therefore you need a combination of business and sustainability expertise and those skill sets in, I would say, chief sustainability officers and other sustainability champions in the company. Now, the other caveat is the mindset change, like Kubra, you have mentioned out in the introduction, and this is probably the most important barrier to our progress, to actually moving beyond sustainability on the side, doing sustainability on the side. But at the same time, it is a barrier that is not sufficiently acknowledged in the mainstream. And the solutions to it, such as, methodical training and empathy, are dismissed as esoteric and not part of serious business. But really the main barrier is the lack of interest, being stuck in thinking me and now, and not thinking us and the future, which are actually expressions of Rebecca Henderson, a Harvard professor, and I just love to use them. Yeah, I wanted to give her credit. Now, when I come to investors, yes, I think, first of all, I would suggest, and I'm curious what Andrea is going to say on the same topic, but I would suggest investors have to realize that a lot of the current mainstream ESG ratings and the investor-focused instruments, reporting instruments such as the TCFD, the ISB, and so on, are actually not very helpful in capturing a true picture of the investment portfolio. So first of all these instruments that I've just mentioned, they really focus only on the inside out materiality, really ESG risks to the company. But I think there is a growing awareness that the company's inside out impacts, how the company impacts the planet, the economy, and so forth, has an effect on the overall market and therefore on the rest of the portfolio. But I would actually suggest we go one step further, and in the context of the various feedback loops that we are increasingly aware of, we should realize that the inside out impacts themselves aggravate the inside out risks. And therefore, unless you manage the inside out impacts, the risks will keep increasing. And hence again, to conclude, inside out impacts have to be managed and they have to fit within planetary boundaries. And what investors can do to make this, once they have made this realization, what they can do is pretty straightforward, and that is influence stakeholders, companies, regulators, the rating agencies and so on, to move towards reporting, sustainability reporting, and levels of accountability that acknowledge planetary boundaries and are contextualized within them.
Well, thank you very much, Alice. This is actually very insightful, and it just tells me that there is a lot of challenging that we have to do with all types of players in the industry to make a real transformation. So, and we will get back to Andrea in a little bit regarding more insights on the investments. But before that, I would like to come to Rajesh because at CSR Works, actually, they also give a lot of ESG trainings, and I would like to ask him, so when you guys give ESG training to corporations and help them improve their sustainability reporting, align it with global standards, in your opinion, how advanced are those reports of the listed corporations, especially in terms of sharing results related to circularity and the life cycle of those corporations' products? So how can you tell, for example, from the reporting that a corporation is genuinely contributing to a circular economy? Rajesh, if you could just share there some insights, because you deal with those corporations on a daily basis, and we would love to find out how they are doing.
Yes, Kubra. So other than training, we also get to see some of the best sustainability reports that Asia produces every year at our Asia Sustainability Reporting Awards. And, circular economy or circularity is still new subject, especially in Asia. I can say that around the world, we have lots of very good examples from around the world, but still by and large, if you look at a corporate strategy, sustainability strategy, circularity or circular economy is not in the top 5 items or top 6 or 7 items. So I think I was listening to Alice, she was talking about sustainability reporting standards and how circularity is recognized or not recognized. I think that's a very important point, because when we talk about sustainability reporting, at the core of sustainability report, we look at GRI standards or whichever materiality lens you want to use, especially GRI standards. So we say that, well, as a business, you have to look at your impact on the environment, economy, and people, and so on. So when all these companies, and even the ones which have been reporting, say, for the last 15 years, 18 years, if you look at their materiality assessment, it hardly recognizes circular economy or circularity as one of their impacts. So I think that's a very important observation for us to have, that circular economy or their impact in terms of circularity is still not part of their materiality assessment. So I think there's a gap there, which we need to consider that how to fix that gap. Now, saying that, there are certain sectors, there are certain companies, they are taking note of circular economy, and they do discuss what they are trying to do. And then again, within this whole idea of circular economy, it's not just recycling, it's just not reuse, it's not just reducing waste, it's not just waste management, it's much more than that. So it's just moving away from your linearity and getting into a circular loop of bringing the entire operation in a value chain in that loop. So I think some companies' discussion just stops there: waste management reduction, reuse, recycle, recyclability, and recyclable content or percentage of content in their products. But they need to move beyond that. I have a couple of examples that I noticed in our last year's 2021 Asia Sustainability Reporting Awards. There are 2 companies from Taiwan. So generally in Asia, you will see that companies from Taiwan, they are very innovative because of the circumstances that they are in. And one was ASUS, which is a computer manufacturer, and the other one was AU Optronics, which is one of the largest digital display manufacturer in the world. Now, these 2 companies, they took an LCA, life cycle analysis approach, And one of them, AU Optronics, even talks about being the first display manufacturer in the world to secure a circularity certification. So that's something good to know, that there are certification schemes. When there is another automobile manufacturer in India, so one of the largest in the world, called Mahindra. So they are very large one of the largest for tractors and cars and vehicles and jeeps and so on. So recently they opened India's first government authorized company to recycle vehicles. Vehicles when people discard, otherwise it would go to a wherever. But so they are doing that. So we see these initiatives here and there. But I can say that companies in Asia especially are still in their very early stages of understanding. And that also means that there's a huge potential, there's a huge opportunity to really draw on the principles of circular economy. And we are talking about resilience, we are talking about building future fit businesses. And I don't understand how you can build a future fit business if circularity is not at the core of your business.
Well, Rajesh, thank you. Well, this is again just similar to Alice's thoughts. It's very insightful in the sense that we have a lot of work to do, I guess, here, because if a lot of companies are not even recognizing circularity in the materiality assessment, that is, of course, makes the situation quite difficult. But then, as Rajesh has pointed out, maybe there are already some companies that are doing a good job. They could provide good practice examples for others. Yeah, we have to keep pushing to understand how to make people understand about this major transition that is needed. Andrea, to add to Alice's thoughts on investments, with your experience of more than a decade in investment management, can you also share your insights about how investors could influence sustainability in a way that funds actually start flowing towards a circular transition?
It's a big question to unwrap, Kubra, but I'm going to give it a go.
Yeah.
I'm going to take a step back first, because I think we need some context in terms of how we get investor money to flow into the right places. And we need to recognize the role of policy and government. I know that's not the scope of this, but when we want system level change, we need to be thinking at a systems level, and we need collaboration. So I don't think we can underestimate the role of government to create pathways for investors to follow. So that's the backdrop. So we're going to make that assumption that that will be put in place. I know Europe have some regulations and a roadmap, and I believe China does as well. So against that backdrop, I think remember that the finance system is incredibly efficient and incredibly smart. And if it smells an opportunity, the money will flow. I think there's also incredible herd mentality in the finance sector, and that's what we're hoping to use with our finance system benchmark in terms of showing the best practices and that it can be done. But against that backdrop, on a practical level, first, I think that within the existing system constraints, there are two ways that investors can approach this in terms of from a strategic perspective and probably feeding into an operational level. And Alice, I would love your input onto this as well. I think the first one is that investors have to not reward inbuilt obsolescence. So when investors and due diligence teams are looking at business models and looking at profits, future revenues, number of units that can be sold, inbuilt obsolescence is obviously such a fundamental part of post-industrial revolution in manufacturing and product that we need to make sure that investment managers and they're not drawn to business models that are rewarding, and perhaps that will be something that comes within regulatory or disclosure requirements. I think the second and probably actually more important point is timelines to investing. We've got to try and snuff out short-termism. It is circularity and the transition of businesses to move their business models from linear to circular models needs time. I've heard quoted at least 7 years. Investors are challenged markets, we see in the headlines at the moment, market backdrop is tough. And if they keep monitoring businesses and markets quarter to quarter and holding CEOs accountable quarter to quarter, it is going to hold back the ability to move to a circular business model. So I think calling that out is really important. There are obviously very many different types of investors when we talk about the role of investor. I think those institutional investors or anybody running a mandate that is running beauty parades, monitoring, evaluating, and letting go of asset managers, they need to be articulating longer term mandates to give investment managers the breadth to be able to move. And I think probably underpinning that is liquidity as well, but that's a much bigger conversation. So against those kind of fundamentals within the existing structure, Alice and Rajesh, obviously disclosure and reporting is key, and that's fundamental with the World Benchmarking Alliance. We want accountability and want to close the gap between what companies and businesses and investors, what they say and what they do. But I'm going to put this at a practical level in terms of what's the role of finance, and recognizing to support a circular economy. There are different roles of finance at different stages for getting us there. And perhaps if I can, my perspective and my experience from within the system and where money flows between private and public markets. I think the first point is we need more innovation, because to get to circularity, there are solutions out there already, but there's a lot more that's needed, and that needs funding. I think I like to quote Larry Fink's letter. Everybody in the finance industry follows that annual release of the letter, and he talked about the 1,000 unicorns, and most investors are looking for the next unicorn, and he states that the next unicorns are going to be those that are going to net zero. Solutions for net zero, and obviously circularity is underpinned for us to get to net zero. So I think for recognizing the role of the finance system to create an innovative solutions, and that's typically the private market, so venture capital, private equity, public debt, and basically those sections of the market that are risk takers, that are prepared to take the risk for the chance of that being the next multi-billion dollar unicorn. And again, and I think that's probably going to need government policy, because for financiers to take that risk, they need certainty, and certainty on that scale is going to come from government. I think then we move further around in the finance system and we look at how do we strengthen it. There's innovation there, but strengthening it and underpinning that. And I think that's where lending and the insurance markets come in. And I think some innovation, I know there's some great structures that are coming on with sustainable bonds. So I think obviously debt markets and some new structures. There's some great initiatives. So some of the leading banks have started issuing circular bonds. So I think I expect us getting more volume there, again driven by investor demand, and so that we can move out of the innovation stage and then move towards scale. And scale is what is going to move the dial. Reporting and disclosure is absolutely key, but we need a carrot, not a stick approach. We'll use the stick for those that aren't catching up and seeing the business opportunity, but incentivizing and collaboration and working together is what's going to move the dial. And I think to get to scale, that's when we need banks on side, life assurance, the life assurance industry. So we've got innovation that's coming on in terms of retail funds, products, and the might of those that have distribution and access to fund flows, pushing it through their channels. And we've seen that happen with ESG, like it or not, and ESG is such a big discussion about how effective it is. My personal feeling is that ESG has been part of the framework that is helping mainstream finance it move from niche into mainstream, and we're going to evolve beyond ESG to sustainability. My hope is that ESG will be a framework that will probably 5 years' time will look very different. But if we're going to get to scale, we need language, we need narrative, we need storytelling, as well, that takes those business cases and takes it to the mainstream investor. So I think it's, so in summary, we've got to recognize the interconnection between different sections of the finance market and different stages of the circular economy. And I imagine when you look at whether you're looking at textiles or construction, I know in the battery, I know there's work happening in the battery market, circularity, just recognizing what stage of development those circular economies at, and talk and empower the right sections of the finance system.
Okay, well, Andrea, that's wonderful. So first of all, I'm hearing from every speaker that short-termism is a big problem, or thinking about yourself and not us is a big problem. And then I think here, this was a very good conclusion with Andrea just explaining how innovation can actually play a huge role if you really want to go through a major circular transformation. So now, just to manage our time, I would like to move our next subject and question, because I would also like us to discuss another concept. I would like to talk about how you think about circularity, that it does not only make sense environmentally, but how it can also create new and decent jobs for people, how it could benefit global economies, and how it could impact positively disadvantaged communities. So this is also another subject. For example, to address climate change, we need circular economies globally, of course. However, this system transformation, in my opinion, needs to take hold also at a local and community-based level. Indeed, dealing with waste daily is actually a localized issue too. So local communities, for example, in emerging market regions, they play an essential role. Their communities have a willing and captive labor force. But as we all know, too many of these workers, with them, I mean, waste pickers, for example, they live in harsh and squalid conditions around the world, be it the people who pick over the waste mountains in India, or the cardboard collectors, for example, in Hong Kong. They actually all need proper recognition of their role for the work they do for a circular economy. Also, they need better working conditions. They need better monetary incentives. So I also wanted to discuss the subject from this point of view and hear your views on it. So I will again start with Alice. Alice, could you please give us some examples of successful localized efforts contributing to a circular economy that also help disadvantaged communities? And here maybe some of efforts that need to take a more radical approach, as we also just discussed earlier. So if you could also connect it back to your previous insights, that would be very helpful. Alice, could you go ahead?
Yes, I was muted, sorry. Thank you, Kubra, for again introducing the topic. And there's so much that I would also love to follow up on from what Rajesh and Andrea have said, but I'll, again, in the interest of time, move on with the topic. First of all, and that actually is a nod to Rajesh's point, to achieve a circular economy, we have to move way beyond just recycling and responsible waste management, as has been said. And there's an incredible importance of closing the loop. And this seems to be much easier done in a local context, because otherwise, at a scale, and again, Andrea spoke about the importance of scale, we would be really just increasing exponentially the amount of waste we would be shipping around the globe and putting additional strain on the already strained supply chain logistics, and that's just not doable. And there is one example of a local effort that I would like to mention, and that may be familiar to a lot of the members of the audience, and that is the Kalundborg Symbiosis in Denmark, which is a group of 11 partnered companies that operate across sectors and that have achieved a near circular system, which they call industrial symbiosis. And they have 25 exchange streams between them. They are exchanging energy, water, material, and so on and so forth. And they have achieved both all of the three, the environmental, economic, and positive social impacts. They are economizing hundreds of thousands of tons of CO2 annually, tens of thousands of tons of waste material annually in this group. And they have achieved higher profitability, higher resilience, and so on and so forth. And they are driving their social impact through sourcing from local social enterprises. That's where it's coming to your point about disadvantaged communities. And this level of interlinking between these businesses actually took them almost decades to develop. And so coming back again to the momentum and to the need for urgency and so on, I think we really need to now find a way to emulate this example, but put it on a fast track so that we can see a lot of similar initiatives pop up everywhere around the world and gradually create the economy. Now coming to an area where I think that we need to see much more radical action from companies, and that also is touching both on the environmental and social aspects. This is, I think, when it comes to management of agricultural supply chains, that is one of the areas where we are really lacking in action. And that's not to say that there are no players in the space doing really amazing work. But if I speak about what so-called sustainability leaders, companies that supposedly lead in sustainability, what their level of action is, it is absolutely insufficient. If we look at our agricultural inputs, they are threatened by the impacts of climate change, the impacts of unsustainable farming practices, and also by the exodus of the workforce that are just leaving the farming livelihoods because of the conditions of cyclical poverty. And this is a worldwide phenomenon and a human rights issue. There's a lot of data from around the world. I could mention some for India. For example, only 1.2% of the rural population in India, the youth of India, aspires to be farmers. The average farmer is 50-plus-year-old, whereas the average population in India is 26 years old. You can see that the whole cohort is actually near retirement, and there's nobody wishing to replace them. As far as I know, the latest data was that 2,000 farmers were giving up farming every single day in India. Yeah, and so this really shows that we need coming to circularity, one of the principles of circularity is to regenerate nature, right? We need to introduce regenerative agriculture, not in small pockets, but sector-wide, for us to have agricultural inputs, to have food and anything we produce with agricultural inputs. But we also have to make sure that creating good agricultural livelihoods is a really specific business objective for all the companies that operate in this space. But what we actually have at the moment, again, coming to the so-called leaders and to calling out lack of action and so on, as has been mentioned, you will see in the reports goals such as, let's make 100% of our farmers empowered. And when you dig into that goal, and what does it actually mean? What is the target, the success metric? It means that the farmers have received access to an app. Or there will be a goal that says make 100% of farmers educated, but the target is make sure that they have been sent 3 communications a year. You can see the huge gap between what is being done and the huge gap between the scale of the problem. Yeah.
Alice, just very quickly, could you also point out how can the Investor Relations Department influence the investment community in climate change and in this whole transition? Just 1 or 2 Investor Relations.
Absolutely.
Also be very
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So as Andrea said, if investors see opportunity, they will see where they will go after it, right? They will go where the carrot is. And I think that the most important thing that investor relations team can do is actually pique this interest. And what I would personally suggest is that they pool resources with other like-minded, teams in other investor relations departments, with potentially NGOs, activists, climate scientists, and other stakeholders, and they build this high-level portfolio level business case for their investors, analyzing the future scenarios, extrapolating those risks and opportunities and so on, and presenting it to their stakeholders, to their investors, so that the investors actually see this is the reality of where your portfolio is heading, and it's not heading in a good direction at the moment. And this way, the other thing they could do is then, having generated this interest, do a lot of dialogue through a fora like these, and essentially discuss how the investment, as Andrea said, the money flows, how they may have to change and adapt for circularity to be possible. One aspect was, again, ending short-termism. Another aspect is, if the example of the Kalundborg symbiosis is an example to go after, then this is a massive change needed for investors, right? Investing into, in this case, it would be betting into multiple horses pulling the same cart rather than betting on an individual horse. So there's a lot of change there that needs to take place.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Thank you, Alice. I want to right away move to Rajesh. I know that also within the scope of his work, he does a lot of, he puts a lot of thoughts on the SDGs and how they work. So here, I would like to pose Rajesh this question. Could you please explain to us how the circular economy is not only an environmental matter, but also a social issue? And especially if you could bring in some of your wonderful ideas about which SDGs you think are most relevant and tied to this concept of circular economy.
Yeah. So, when we talk about circularity or circular economy, basically we are saying that we have to imitate the nature. Mm-hmm. and nature, the entire natural system, the way the natural system operates. And within the natural system, you have everything. You have the S, you have the E, you have the G, everyone is included there. And nature takes care of itself. It's just that we have our intervention, and our species intervention has disrupted the nature. And that's why we have this problem, whether it's climate change or lots of other issues. So I think when a business tries to address circularity related to their business, or even if a government or NGOs, when they look at circularity, they will very soon realize, and there are so many examples and so many projects around the world, very soon they realize that it's not about just solving one environmental problem. Mm-hmm. Because all these issues are so interconnected. And it's very hard to imagine to have a very successful, large-scale circular economy project which does not have social effects or social impact or even economic impact. Mm-hmm. So just a couple of examples that I have seen, and they are discussed quite extensively in circular economy discussions, is that there's a one very simple local project in Ghana, where there was a sanitation problem in a rural remote community. And to solve that, a local entrepreneur decided to do something about it. And they came up with a very innovative, what they call a blue box. They came up with a portable, kind of sanitation solution for households. And then the human waste is collected from each household. And then it's taken to another place where it's treated, and then converted into something which is something to charcoal. And that can be burned, that can be used for cooking and a lot of other stuff, much less polluting than charcoal. You don't have to cut trees. And you can see the effects now here. It has created a new business and a new income generation opportunity, and at the same time improve the living quality of these residents. Very quickly, I can also mention another example, because a lot of circularity issues are at the city level or at the larger level. So one of these cities in Brazil, what they have done with the help of NGOs, so to tackle e-waste, which is an environmental problem, so they said, well, what we are going to do is we are going to put to establish computer reconditioning centers. So the entire e-waste is brought to these centers, and then they train unemployed youth who are in the age group of 16 to 24 to work with this e-waste and recondition and build new computers out of that e-waste. So you can imagine, and then these computers are given to those who really need them in schools and in libraries, and otherwise they can't access these laptops or computers. So with just one project, you are tackling an environmental problem, you are tackling digital inclusion, you're tackling unemployment, you're tackling youth empowerment and youth engagement. So I think one has to be very creative, and there's a lot of scope to be creative when you're looking at problems related to circular economy.
Thank you, Rajesh. It is very, very true that the sustainable development goals are so interconnected to each other. And when we are trying to fix one problem, we really have to think from all dimensions. And just like the projects that Rajesh has just mentioned, that is the best way to go of really tackling various issues at the same time, so that we can really benefit our society. And going now back to Andrea, Alice has already talked about a little bit about investor relations and how they approach to this issue of connecting circular economy also to disadvantaged communities, how to create decent work and good jobs, how to promote local economies. Andrea, could you also give some examples how the investment community is helping at the moment to solve those problems, especially related to waste collection, waste removal, and even processing infrastructure for local communities?
I'm acutely conscious of time, so I'm going to keep this really short and sweet, Kubra. My experience on where investors have moved to with regards to waste and processing typically links to the megatrends. Investors typically like thematics, and I think especially with markets where they've been and uncertainty and looking for non-cyclical solutions. So infrastructure investments are incredibly popular. I've seen a number of family offices in China and the Middle East invest in business, private equity, VC in waste management into energy, because waste is an issue, and obviously energy and the transition of fossil fuel is an issue. So projects, infrastructure projects that solve both of those problems. And I think one in particular where I've seen is that they had a business model that was aligned with government as well, with government de-risking it. They financed it, it went incredibly well, and they're looking to scale that in other areas of the world as well. So that's just a quick, short one. But again, you need to link it to the investment case. And my closing comment is just, we talked about investor relations, but I think for us, and that's obviously crucial, Alice, in terms of talking about narrative and storytelling, and those good investor relations, that's their skill and their art. But I think fundamentally for us to get scale and system change, we have to go beyond that. It needs to go, it's C-suite, it's embedded in the DNA of the business from a strategic level, C-suite, and it feeds down and it's embedded in the investment process. And sustainability can't sit as a separate function. It needs to be embedded in all the existing functions as business as normal.
Andrea, thank you. I actually happen to know that all our speakers have so many wonderful thoughts, and there's so much more that they can and wish to share. However, at this stage, I believe I have to start finishing up. So I am very thankful for being there, for making the time, and also for Turkish IR Society to give us all the opportunity, and also me to moderate this wonderful panel. Thank you so much. And finally, I would also like to use the opportunity to tell to our listeners, thank you for making the time for all of us.